Jey Uso is the new WWE Intercontinental Champion after defeating Bron Breakker on this week's edition of WWE Raw. Finally, singles gold for Jey, and what a memorable ending this was to this week's edition of Raw. One of the more memorable endings, I think, to any show in the Triple H era thus far. Sure, there have been some with bigger magnitude, like a WrestleMania and such, but this was a huge moment because of what it means moving forward for Jey Uso. And if you know, the build coming into this was really all about, can Jey finally win a singles title, right? They kept bringing up the stat, 0-6, 0-6, 0-6, and they really sort of, beat that through in this episode. And that's when we probably should have known that when WWE does something like that, it's because they're about to finally execute their plan of having someone kind of triumph and finally get that elusive win. That's what happened here. You guys know I talked about it last week. I thought Breakker was going to retain the title. I thought it was a scenario where you could have Judgment Day interfere, and maybe it drags this thing on a little bit where Jey comes up short again, and you have him kind of get into this tag team stuff with Sami Zayn against the Judgment Day. I still think that's something that's probably going to happen, but when you really think about it and you start to look at the story and now how they played it out by having Jey actually win the championship now, it starts to make a lot of sense because when you look at this thing and see how it all plays out, there was something after the show, I think, that was just as important as what actually happened with Jey winning the Intercontinental Championship on the show. If you look at the Raw exclusive interview that Jey did with Jackie Redmond, Jey goes into the crowd, he's got the championship, and the fans start chanting for him. And, everyone is behind Jey Uso, the huge pop you had when he won the championship. But you see here the emotions that start to come out, which, again, I can't properly, bring through actually the emotion that was coming through Jey during that interview. I highly suggest you check it out because that kind of shows you what this meant. But it was perfect because it wasn't just, real life Jey Uso getting the "you deserve it" chance from the crowd and letting that emotion come out. It's all part of the story that they've been telling with Jey Uso in terms of his exit from the Bloodline. And now, what is going to be the thing that gets him back into this story? And this was a very, very important point in doing that. Had he lost again, then we would have still been probably saying, all right, well, what's going to bring Jey back into this? They're going to come back, Roman or Heyman or Jimmy or whoever it is are going to have to come back and somehow get Jey back into this thing. It was a little bit tough to try to figure out what was going to be the reason that Jey would have all of a sudden just said, all right, I'll do this. You're still going to ask that question whenever you do get Roman Reigns or Jimmy Uso or Paul Heyman coming over to Raw or however they decide to do it to try to get Jey back in time for this War Games match, at the end of November. But now there is something that Jey has that gives him all the power in this scenario. It's no longer the Bloodline having power over Jey Uso, or not even specifically the Bloodline, right? It's either Roman or Jimmy. It's not his brother. It's not Roman. Those are no longer the people that have the power over Jey Uso. Why? Because of one of the reasons that they brought up, and one of the reasons that Jey has brought up, because of why he left the Bloodline. And I think now that he is a singles champion, they can no longer look at Jey Uso and say, well, what have you done without being in the Bloodline, right? What have you been able to accomplish other than going over to Raw and being 0-7? Had he lost this match, he'd have been 0-7 in these championship opportunities. You need us more than we need you. Even though now we look at the setup, right? And it actually is a scenario where Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso need Jey Uso more than he needs them. And I think that is now part of the story moving forward because Jey has proven himself. He just won the Intercontinental Championship. He did something that no one thought he could do outside of just the hardcore fans who had been behind Jey Uso. And there was this, sort of Jey movement, I guess you could say, to where he became one of the top stars on Raw. But what did he have to show for it? Now he has this to show for it. An emotional person who is sitting here in the crowd holding on to this championship while he's surrounded by his biggest fans. They're chanting, "You deserve it." All these things. This was one of the things that Jey wanted to achieve when he left the Bloodline. He wanted to prove that he was not just a lackey. He was not just someone that was one half of one of the best tag teams in the history of WWE. He wanted to prove that he was Jey Uso. He was his own man. He could succeed without the Bloodline. And remember, we've talked about it in other videos before, where Jey has brought up, the fact that he knew when he had to leave the Bloodline. Sami Zayn has brought up, he knew that it was the right time to leave the Bloodline. There were different reasons for it and all that, but it was all about him getting away from feeling like, an afterthought behind Roman Reigns and everything else that was going on in the Bloodline. Jey had to go out. He had to be his own man. And now this was one of those crowning achievements where you can finally go back now, as you have Roman Reigns and Jimmy getting back into this thing. Like we said, we assume Heyman's going to be involved in some way, shape, or form in trying to convince different people maybe to get back into this, Bloodline saga moving forward. But now Jey has the power back because he can now be the person who is sitting there in a very, very enviable position to where you guys say you want me to come back into this thing. Well, you can't use the excuse that, hey, Jey, you don't have a choice because look at what you've done without us. Nothing. Well, now Jey has done something without him, and it's not as though he hadn't before, but winning a singles championship, that gives Jey Uso a lot now to shove back in the face of Roman Reigns and Jimmy Uso and whoever else is trying to get him to throw that away momentarily, throw away the focus of being the Intercontinental Champion, and bring him back into the thing that almost led to his downfall, being part of this Bloodline saga. So now the story gets a lot more intriguing because now you got to figure out how is Roman Reigns going to get Jey Uso back into this thing. There's got to be another reason. There's got to be a lot more convincing because what Jey is doing now, is it worth throwing away or potentially losing this huge moment, right? Now as a singles champion, is this worth throwing away potentially to get back into something that ultimately almost led to your demise? That, I think, is part of the story as we move forward with this thing. And I just thought that the way they executed it was good. And again, I did not necessarily think this far ahead, but now that you see it, you can understand that this was one of the primary motivations going into this match, why they set this match up in the first place, have Jey win the tournament to get the shot at Bron Breakker. And now this was a spot where Jey simply could not lose. He had to win because if he didn't, he would have been like, oh, can I really achieve this kind of stuff without these guys? And then that would have put all the power back in the hands of the people who wronged him, right? I mean, that's what this comes down to, is if you're going to get all these people back on the same page, Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, Sami Zayn, if you're going to get that band back together to be ready for this War Games match against likely Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and the Tongans, if that's going to happen, everyone kind of has to have a different reason for coming back together. And it would have been so simple for Jey to just basically come crawling back and say, well, maybe they were right about me. Maybe I couldn't go out and do this on my own. But now he's achieved winning one of the most prestigious championships there is, the WWE Intercontinental Championship. And now they are the ones who have to come begging him to give that all away to jump back into something else that could lead to his demise with the Bloodline versus the Bloodline at Survivor Series and War Games. So that, I think, is one of the big reasons why Jey won this match. He had to do it. He could not afford to lose this one again. And now that gives Jey Uso a lot of power as we head into this Bloodline saga continuing, and whether Roman Reigns can get the group back together in time for this huge showdown with Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and the Tongans at Survivor Series. But there you go. There were my thoughts, guys. I thought this was a great finish. It also added a little bit of that Attitude Era-esque unpredictability where, you always like to kind of have one of these matches where it feels like it's must-see coming out of it because you didn't necessarily expect this to happen. You were thinking, could there be interference? You were thinking, all right, who's going to screw Jey this time? It didn't happen. He cleanly won the championship. So now you have to tune into these kind of matches moving forward because you don't want to miss one of these moments, and this was one of the best moments of the year in WWE of having Jey Uso win this championship. And again, for anyone who wants to look at this from Bron Breakker's standpoint, I think Bron Breakker's going to be just fine. I don't think this hurts Bron Breakker in any way. He is still young. He still had plenty of good matches, even in what was a somewhat short title reign of a month and a half. He had some memorable matches. He still got some memorable feuds set up, and we know there is going to be the rematch at some point, Breakker versus Jey for the title. But to me, Bron Breakker came out of this better than he was going into it. He really established himself, I think, as a future world champion. And now we see what happens with Jey's run on the road to, like we said, we're going into Bad Blood. We're going into Survivor Series. There's still Crown Jewel before that. So a lot of interesting things to come to see where we get to with getting Jey back in the Bloodline. So there you go, guys. There are my thoughts on Jey Uso winning the Intercontinental Championship. Let me know what you thought about this match. What did you think about Jey's victory, and where do things go from here with Jey and the Bloodline? Always appreciate your feedback. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your thoughts on new Intercontinental Champion Jey Uso.